The rain hadn't stopped all day, the kind that steadily pounded the sidewalks of the South End and snaked the corners of Harrison Street. I hurried out of the garage under an umbrella, my laptop bag heavy on my shoulder, already planning a long evening of reviewing drawings. When I reached the lobby of my building near the ink block, my shoes were wet, but the sight of polished marble floors and the familiar gesture of the doorman usually put me at ease. Not tonight. Something felt off the spot the moment the elevator door to my floor opened. A faint smell of cardboard and tape reached me before I even opened the door. When I pushed it open, the sight was very strange. Piles of cardboard boxes blocked the living room windows. My scarves were folded incorrectly, sticking out of half-closed boxes, and there were heaps of shoes, sketchbooks, even framed photographs that had been ripped from shelves and put back in their place. My sister Marin, as everyone called her, was sitting on the sofa, legs crossed, phone in hand, though that nickname no longer held any warmth for me. She didn't look up right away. Instead, she tapped on her screen, gave a soft laugh, and then finally said, as if it were perfectly normal, "We need to make room. My husband and children are moving in with us next weekend." Elias was there too, standing uncomfortably by the coffee table. His face was pale, his hands strapped to the back of a chair. He didn't speak into the speakerphone. My parents chimed in, their voices faint and harsh from a distance. My mother's words, "This is my job, dear. Families need to stay together," sounded like another box being taped shut. I dropped my keys on the table with a sharp metallic clink, louder than I intended. "You're moving in here." My voice barely reached me, but Marin smiled as if she'd won something. As she went on and on about bedrooms and how children need their own space, my eyes slid down to the entry closet. A thin red file was wedged between the vacuum cleaner and a pile of rolls of fabric. The lease, my initials on each page, and just my name. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I went further in, letting the door close behind me. The boxes stood silent witnesses to what had just begun. It hadn't started with the boxes. It had started weeks earlier on a gray afternoon, when Marin appeared at my door with 2 wheeled suitcases and a deliberate sigh. "Just a few days," she said, hurrying past me before I could put down my coffee. Elias looked surprised but gave her a slight nod. I told myself it was temporary, that she'd be gone as quickly as she'd appeared. By the second week, the guest room was no longer mine to give away. She'd filled the closet with discount clothes and covered the bed with a throw that didn't match the neutrals I'd chosen. Soon, the guest bathroom was painted lavender, a stark color that spilled into the hallway every time the door opened. When I asked her about it, she tossed her hair and said, "You're welcome." Packages started arriving almost daily. Groceries I'd ordered through my Prime account, rugs with bold patterns that contrasted sharply with the polished wood floors, and murals with fake motivational quotes. I felt as though the apartment I'd so carefully curated, with all the details that reflected years of work, had been stolen by someone who had no business paying for it. Elias grew quieter as his health declined. He was in pain from the mess, but he didn't say a word, explaining quietly at night that he didn't want to start a fight. My parents called from Cambridge and assured me that this was how families usually did things. "Sisters help each other," Mum said like a bombshell. I kept quiet. One Sunday morning, while Marin was still asleep and Elias was resting, I crept into my office and photocopied the lease and the building regulations. I put the copies in a thin file and slipped it into my briefcase. If there were boundaries being crossed, I wanted proof of where they were drawn. By the time Marin started hinting at bigger changes, I already knew what I would need to show. That morning, when I walked into my office and saw the drawing table tacked to the wall, I knew it had gone from being a nuisance to a robbery. Marin was standing in the middle of the room, waving her hands like a real estate agent giving a tour. "This will be the perfect study and playroom," she announced. "The children will need their own space, and Dad was thinking of a quiet reading nook." My drawings and unfinished fabric samples, carefully mounted on corkboards, were piled in a corner like junk mail. Elias stepped forward, his voice low but firmer than I had heard in weeks. "Don't touch Marin's samples. That's her work." Marin turned with a forced smile and placed a hand on his shoulder, as if to soothe the child. "Relax, little brother. She can move them. Creativity needs a change of scenery." Elias hesitated, the resistance he had mustered finally giving way. Later that evening, my parents called. My mother's tone held the same practiced patience she'd used when I was a teenager, refusing to lend Marin a dress. "Be generous, Beatrice. Your sister brings stability. You have plenty of space. Sharing is part of the family tradition." I pressed the phone to my ear, staring around the apartment that suddenly felt alien to me. My parents' words had weight, but they weren't authoritative. "Not here." After the call ended, I sat at my desk, putting back every scribbled drawing. I opened the red folder again, tracing the items with my fingertips. Sole tenant Beatrice Hill. Lease terminated with 30 days notice from the tenant. No transfer, no subletting, no assignment without landlord's consent. These weren't just lines on a page. They were boundaries no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. If my family refused to respect the spoken limits, I would have to enforce the written ones. The next morning, when Marin casually mentioned that the master bedroom would be more suitable for our parents than for me, I didn't object. I just glanced at her, then at Elias, and carried the folder to the kitchen where the morning light reflected off its red cover as a warning. I came home early that Thursday, the rain slapping against the windows, to find more boxes cluttering the living room. My closet was half empty, scarves were crumpled, and shoes were in boxes. Marin was lounging on the sofa, sipping Chardonnay with the contentment of someone who's settled in. When she finally looked up at me, she tilted her head, her voice quiet yet sharp. "Don't overreact. Beatrice, this isn't really your home. It's a rented place." Elias shifted nervously near the window. His hands trembled, and his gaze fell to the floor. His silence was worse than her words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. Instead, I went to the entry closet, pulled out the thin red folder, carried it into the room, and placed it on the coffee table. I opened it so that my name was printed in black ink. My initials were engraved on every page. "If you want it," I said quietly, "take it. Keep paying the $5,300 rent a month." Elias's face paled. For the first time, Marin's mocking smile faded. Our parents' voices grew faint over the phone. I closed the file quietly, tucked it back under my arm, and grabbed my keys. No shouting, no arguing, just the important decision. I walked toward the door, feeling the weight of their stunned silence behind me. As dusk fell, I stood on the balcony of my parents' house in Cambridge. The city lights twinkled beyond the River Charles, and the rain turned to mist. Serafina opened the door before I knocked. She looked at me, saw the weariness in my eyes, and said only, "Your old room is ready." She placed a cup of tea in my hand, steam rising, its warmth piercing the cold. I sipped slowly, the volume at my side, the taste of control mingling with the warmth. I wasn't finished yet. Not yet. Tomorrow, the real plan would begin. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The red folder was still on the nightstand next to the cup of tea my mother had left. The storm had cleared during the night, and the dim light of the Charles River seemed brighter, as if the town itself had been cleansed. I dressed quickly, stuffed the lease into my bag, and drove back across the river to the south end. Mr. Whitmore, the building manager, was already in his office, sorting through the mail. He looked at me, surprised to see me so early. I placed the folder on his desk, opened it to the termination clause, and handed him a typed letter. "This is my 30-day notice. No moving, no subletting. The unit must be completely vacated," I wrote. He adjusted his glasses and read the pages carefully. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said firmly. "And I want written confirmation." He nodded, signed under my copy, and stamped the date. The stamp on the paper clicked like a padlock turning. By midday, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Marin had posted photos from the balcony, showing the city skyline behind her, a glass of wine in her hand, and our parents smiling on either side. "Our new chapter in Boston," she captioned the photo, adding a string of hearts. Within an hour, a friend who still lived in the building had sent me screenshots. "I thought you should see what's being said," she wrote. The neighbors started commenting, and the gossip began. "Isn't the lease in Beatrice's name?" The rumors spread like wildfire. That evening, Elias texted me to meet up. I agreed, but only if it was somewhere neutral. We chose a cafe near Back Bay Station, the kind of place where you can hear the trains whizzing past the floorboards. He arrived late, thinner than before. His eyes were pale. I froze. "I should have turned it off," he admitted, his hands gripping the paper cup tightly. "But it's too loud. And my mom listens." I didn't know what to do. I watched him. The same man who used to fill our apartment with the smell of croissants and sugar now seemed like a stranger who had lost his voice. "You had options," I said quietly, "but you didn't take them." He shuddered, then nodded. "What happens now?" I leaned back, letting the clatter of dishes fill the silence between us. "Time is passing," I said. "They think they've settled down, but all they've done is start the countdown." I left him there, staring at the steam from his coffee, and stepped out into the night air, already thinking about what would happen next. The following weekend, a neighbor told me that Marin had hosted lunch at the flat. By the time the video reached me, I knew what to expect. A boisterous gathering, wine poured before noon, and her voice rising above the clatter of dishes. "We're going to renovate this part," she pointed enthusiastically to the end of the corridor. "We're going to open it up. It's the perfect spot for a children's gallery wall." Later, she announced she was going to turn that small office into a yoga room. It was all about the atmosphere. My parents were there, smiling faintly as if their approval would make her plans a reality. A week later, I learned they had drawn down part of their Cambridge mortgage to help with the moving costs. The money had evaporated on furniture deliveries and contractors who never showed up. Mr. Whitmore kept his distance, but sent me polite updates. Marin, accompanied by Grant, tried to speak to him, insisting that as the actual occupants, the lease should be amended. He explained again that the lease was non-transferable and that I alone held the rights to the unit. They don't want to hear that, he said. But the record was clear. Every letter from him, signed and dated, was added directly to my ever-growing file. Meanwhile, Elias called, his tone quieter than it had been in months. He admitted he was looking for his own place, not in the South End, but closer to Harvard Square. He would use the small inheritance his grandmother had left him, enough to cover a deposit and a few months' rent. I need to prove I can live without help, he said. For the first time, I heard determination instead of excuses. I kept my responses measured, neither forgiving nor condemning. If you're serious, I told him, start with your own lease. The days passed, and I watched from afar as Marin's confidence grew more evident. She took more photos on the balcony. My parents tagged every post. To the outside world, it looked like a victory. To me, it looked like a family digging deeper and deeper, oblivious to the ground crumbling beneath their feet. The 30-day clock was ticking, and with every tick, I knew the fall was coming. On the morning of my last lease, I woke to an email from Mr. Whitmore confirming that the maintenance department would be posting eviction notices on my apartment door. By noon, they were in place. I would be vacating by the end of the week. I put my phone down, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and waited. The call came sooner than I expected. Marin's voice burst through the line, sharp and slurred. "We're being evicted," the manager said. "What the hell is going on?" I waited for her words to settle before answering. "The lease is in my name, Marin. Only my name. The rent is $5,300 a month, and subletting is prohibited. You knew that when you moved in." "You can't do this," she yelled. "We've invested everything. My parents sold their house. Grant quit his job." I interrupted her. "You didn't ask. You assumed. And assumptions don't prove leases." Later that day, my phone rang again, this time with a link. A neighbor recorded the chaos in the hallway. The recording showed Marin pacing back and forth in front of Mr. Whitmore, loudly and angrily accusing him of betrayal. Our mother sat on the steps, clutching a potted fern like a lifeline, while Harold paced back and forth, his face contorted with rage. The camera caught him stopping abruptly and turning to his eldest daughter. His words were clear, even without sound. "You told us this place was yours." Behind them, Elias leaned against the wall, his hands in his jacket pockets, silent. His silence seemed more powerful than any argument. I watched the video twice, then turned it off. The noise, the anger, the humiliation, none of it affected me anymore. What mattered was that the lie had crumbled before the very people she had convinced. 30 days had passed, and the walls she had claimed as her own no longer confined her. The repercussions had not yet begun, and I knew that the next call would not be about the challenge, but about the consequences. Within a week of the evacuation, Marin and her family had vanished from the South End Tower block they had tried to occupy. News leaked through relatives that they were staying with cousins in Quincy, for bodies crammed into a spare storage room. It didn't last long. They soon moved to a cheap hotel near South Station, a place with thin walls and a pervasive smell of chlorine and despair. Rumors spread faster than they did. A colleague sent me a photo taken by a fellow commuter. Marin behind a 24-hour restaurant counter, her hair pulled back, her apron stained. Another message showed my father sweeping a tiled floor in the background while my mother mopped tables. The same people who had lectured me on generosity, now looking exhausted, were paying a price they never imagined they would have to pay. One evening, Serafina called. Her voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. "We should have listened, Beatrice. We believed her because we wanted to. I'm sorry for the pressure we put on you." Harold called afterward, his voice gruff and curt. We had been wrong. It was the closest I'd ever heard him admit his mistake. Elias contacted me too. We met one quiet Sunday in Cambridge, this time without excuses. He told me he'd signed a lease for a small studio near Harvard Square, using his grandmother's inheritance. I needed to learn to rely on myself. "I'm not going to hide behind you or them anymore," he said. He openly acknowledged his vulnerability, then mentioned he'd started therapy to cope with the price of his silence. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied his face. The wrinkles were deeper, but more resolute than before. Perhaps accountability had finally worked where apologies had never. As I walked home that night, the city lights reflected on the river, still and indifferent. My silence, my patience, my refusal to wade into their mess, had a greater effect than any outburst of anger. Justice had been served in its own time, and I hadn't needed to enforce any of it. What remains is for me to decide what I will build after the rubble is removed, and to what extent I am prepared to carry the past with me. Months passed, and the clamor of that disastrous season faded into a quiet background noise. My business was generating enough profit for a generous bonus each quarter. Instead of investing in expansion, I bought a one-bedroom flat along the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill. Smaller, yes, but bathed in sunlight that filtered through the old pine floors and climbed the walls, which seemed to have been waiting for me. I moved slowly, choosing each piece of furniture carefully. No rushing deliveries, no compromises to please anyone. The first thing I hung wasn't a mirror or a painting by someone else, but a tapestry I'd woven myself. Threads of linen and indigo stretched out in a pattern I'd designed long before the chaos. This tapestry cemented the place in my memory in a way no contract could. Elias and I began attending separate therapy sessions, which later overlapped. We didn't call it reconciliation, we called it rebuilding, emotional brick by brick. We were testing the possibility of rebuilding trust without erasing what had been broken. Progress came in small steps. He signed his own lease, paid his bills, and kept his appointments. For the first time, I saw him take responsibility, not as a burden, but as a choice. One early spring afternoon, I stepped out of a fabric shop near South Station and saw her. Marin was standing in front of a quick loan counter, clutching papers, her expression grim. Our eyes met for a moment. Neither of us spoke. She turned away first, and I heard the clink of her heels and the rustle of her bag. I felt neither triumphant nor angry, just the certainty that that chapter was closed. That evening, Elias came over for dinner. He brought fine tea and placed it carefully on the table. In my new kitchen, he didn't touch a drawer or a cupboard unless I pointed it out to him. He poured water into the glasses and sat opposite me, patient, present, and humble. As I watched the tension rise between us, I understood something clearly. Strength isn't about clinging on or forcing results. It was about withdrawing in time and letting the trap close in on those who had built it for themselves.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत ही दर्द भरता है मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मकान तू लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर